Imagine a website where you can go to learn anything. I'm not talking about something like WikiHow or Khan Academy, where information is scattered, repetitive, and relies on a handful of experts to publish articles. I'm talking about a free website similar to Wikipedia, but instead of random facts, this website will have exhaustive guides. From putting together a computer processor, to practicing medicine, to detailed guides on building car engines or houses, where anyone can go to make an entry or addition to the site, as long as you have the appropriate knowledge, which doesn't just teach you general facts, but teaches you how to do things with that knowledge. Universal, free education. This was an idea I had 14 years ago. However, this website is something that I don't think I'll ever have the chance to work on myself. But it's possible that one day, somebody else can pick up the tab and try putting this into the world. So in today's episode, I'm going to dive into the Broad Learning Universal Education System, or the B.L.U.E system for short. My name is Sebastian Rey, and this is the List Podcast, a podcast where each episode checks off an item from a bucket list of ideas I want to share with the world before I die. And outside of my book, I believe the idea for the B.L.U.E system is the most significant idea I've ever come up with. Initially, my plan was to save this idea for the final episode of the list, but lately I've been rethinking that. I'm poor. Okay, maybe not poor, but I definitely don't have enough money for a startup like this. And furthermore, no one knows who I am. Building a website like B.L.U.E has been a dream, but in my circumstances it will probably never be a reality. And I do not have infinite time to put my thoughts into the world, so I might as well get my best ideas out there while I still have time. I want to make it clear, just like I said in my number swap episode, if there's no way to do this myself, then I want someone to take my ideas for the B.L.U.E system and do something with them. But my ideas are just a starting point. Ultimately, anyone who builds this is going to run into their own unique issues and will have to come up with their own unique solutions to the problems and hurdles I'm about to discuss. What I do know is that if the people in charge of this start prioritizing profits over everything else, the website will fail. Optimizing the site for profit is not my vision. If B.L.U.E isn't free and universally accessible, then it defeats the entire purpose. Universal education is in the name. Now, before I start talking about the details of how the B.L.U.E system would work, I want to mention something important. I am very aware that a website like this would not be easy to bring into the world for a variety of reasons. In the US, we currently have an education system that withholds specialized knowledge and makes you pay for access to that knowledge. A website like B.L.U.E could easily be seen as a threat to certain parts of that school system. My guess is that, if the B.L.U.E system became popular enough, certain influential organizations would try to suppress it, mainly because they make tons of money from keeping education exclusive. On top of that, there are also plenty of corporations and big businesses that would never dream of giving their company secrets to the public. If someone were to release a guide on the B.L.U.E system which details how to build an iPhone 17, for example, my guess is that Apple would come after you. They would not want their company secrets being shared publicly, I imagine. A website like B.L.U.E would be up against all of these extremely powerful entities, which is another reason why the B.L.U.E system would be difficult to get off the ground. So the first and most important part of making a website like B.L.U.E, before you even start building the website itself, is putting legal protections in place to prevent lawsuits, copyright claims, and other forms of bureaucratic buggery. It would also probably be beneficial to base the B.L.U.E system in a country where it would be harder for the US government to come after you. They would still try, but putting your company in the right region of the world could be the difference between slow success and instant death. No matter where you base it though, anyone who tries to create this kind of website will experience various legal hurdles and discrimination from traditional institutions. So for anyone who wants to take a stab at building this kind of website, you have to be aware of what you're getting into. So, now that that's out of the way, we can start talking about the B.L.U.E system itself and the questions you might have about it. Let's start with the first question most people are going to have. Can't you just go on the internet if you want to learn how to do things? How would the B.L.U.E system actually be useful or original? Technically, yes, you can use the internet to learn pretty much anything. Sort of. See, one of the big problems I've always had with learning things from the internet is that information on the web is extremely scattered. This is just a hypothetical example, but let's say you find a highly detailed guide on Google which teaches you how to build some type of rocket propulsion system. If you're trying to build that specific type of rocket propulsion system, well, the guide you just found is going to be a big help. But what if you're looking for a different type of rocket propulsion system, one that's a little less common? Well, you're going to have to do another search, and depending on how niche your rocket is, you could be searching for hours, even days, and in the end, you still might not end up finding what you're looking for. Also, when it comes to complex subjects, you often have to go to multiple different sources to get all the information you're looking for, if you're just searching the web normally. The internet is so vast, and information on the internet is so spread out, that finding things is practically its own skill. There are certain things that are extremely common and easy to find, like a recipe for chocolate chip cookies. But the more complicated and nuanced what you're looking for is, the harder your search becomes. You can go to a site like Wikipedia for a lot of stuff, but like I said before, Wikipedia doesn't usually teach you how to do things. They just give you general information about subjects. And on top of that, Wikipedia's information is sometimes highly biased due to the way their moderation system works. There are other sites like WikiHow that actually do teach you how to do things, but if you've ever been on WikiHow, you know that they don't teach you complicated skills and subjects. For example, if you search how to build a car on WikiHow, they're basically going to tell you, Step 1, go to school. Step 2, become a mechanic. They're not going to give you a detailed overview of engine physics, or a guide going over each engine part and what it does. Basically, you're not going to learn anything more complex than how to repair your toaster from WikiHow. There are websites like Khan Academy that advertise themselves as having free education, which do dive into slightly more complicated subject matters. But the problem with Khan Academy is that their information is inconsistent. They might teach you a good amount about one subject, but will have very limited information about other subjects. This is because Khan Academy relies on a handful of experts to write their articles, rather than democratizing the learning process. Plus, if you want to learn an extremely specific thing, like hacking an elevator, well, Khan Academy can't help you, because Khan Academy only teaches general skills and knowledge. They don't have guides on highly niche technical subjects. The goal of the B.L.U.E system is to be a place where you can learn niche technical subjects, going as deep down the rabbit hole as you want, for free. It's also meant to be a place where people can introduce new ideas and theories which break away from current methods. Now I know what you're thinking. What about AI search engines like ChatGPT or Grok or Gemini? Well, yes, those can help if you're trying to learn a niche technical subject. But AI search engines have other problems. For instance, a lot of the information you get from AI depends on how you ask the question. Literally, the way you word your prompt will affect the answer you get. Because of this, the answers from AI aren't always accurate. In many cases, AI will just tell you what it thinks you want to hear. A recent study from OpenAI revealed that one of its own AIs hallucinates 48% of the time. That's not insignificant. Also, if you ask AI to teach you how to do something like building an engine, it's not going to give you an extremely detailed start-to-finish breakdown. And the reason is because AI companies place limits on how long AI chat responses can be. Instead, what's most likely to happen is that AI will give you an overview of certain aspects of engine building, then link you off to other sources for more information. But the worst problem with AI, especially the popular ones, is that they tend to rely on trusted sources of information when giving you answers, which severely limits the information they can give you about many subjects. So even when AI links you to other sources for more info, the sources they're providing you most likely won't tell the whole story. AI search engines don't know everything. They can only do what their masters allow them to, based on their training data. Ultimately, the real problem at the bottom of it all is that the internet is such a gigantic place that you simply can't be aware of everything that's there. In many cases, you have to know where to look before you can find what you're searching for. This is why, ever since I started using the internet in the early 2000s, I always wished that there was one single website I could go to learn how to do things, including the weird and complicated things my autistic childhood self was curious about at the time. That's where the B.L.U.E system comes in. The entire point of the B.L.U.E system would be to gather all useful information having to do with practical skills, real-world systems, and building things of any complexity, and put it all in one place. But how would you actually accomplish this in the real world? How do you keep the B.L.U.E system from becoming cluttered, inconsistent, repetitive, or incomplete? Well, I've thought about that a lot over the years, and this is what I've come up with. The first and most important part of the B.L.U.E system is the hierarchy. Basically, all information which gets published on B.L.U.E should have to fit into a hierarchy of knowledge. At the lowest level, aka level 1, you have the least complex guides, which teach you how to do the most basic things like putting together a transistor. The further you go up the hierarchy, the more complicated guides become. For example, if level 1 computer engineering teaches you how to build a transistor, level 2 could teach you how to chain transistors together to make a logic gate. Of course, there are different types of logic gates, so at level 2, there could be multiple guides teaching you how to build different types of logic gates. At level 3, you could have guides teaching you various ways of chaining logic gates together, and so on. Each guide on the B.L.U.E system should be its own contained entry, and just like Wikipedia, there should never be two different guides covering the same topic, generally speaking. In other words, information should be consolidated to some extent. Ideally, there should only be one definitive guide on how to build a transistor. So if you want to write a guide on building a transistor, you're either going to have to write one that's better than the current guide, or you're going to have to submit modifications to the guide that already exists. But wait a minute, what if there are multiple ways of building a transistor? Well, that's where the method system comes in. Inside of the level 1 guide for building a transistor, it should be possible to list different methods for building a transistor, apart from the main method. Every method should have its own unique article within the main one, and each method can be linked to if another guide references it. Hypothetically, it should be possible to have an unlimited number of methods, so if someone comes up with a new and better method for building a transistor, that can be included in the methods section, and if enough people use it, it could eventually replace the main method. This hierarchy structure can apply to many different subjects as well. For example, if you want to teach medicine, level 1 could teach you how a cell works. Different types of cells can also be explained at level 1. Level 2 could teach you how cells work together to accomplish things or form networks and organs. Level 3 could teach you organ function, etc. Again, these are just examples. What goes on each level of the hierarchy will ultimately be up to the site users. These hierarchies don't necessarily have to be limited to pre-existing subjects either. If someone comes up with a new and better system for doing math, that user can create a brand new hierarchy and a new math system starting from the simplest concepts and working their way up. As long as this new math system is structured appropriately, I see no reason why it shouldn't be allowed. One thing that's critical though, is that all guides higher than level 1 must be completable using lower level content. In other words, anyone who starts at the lowest level of the hierarchy should be able to progress to the higher levels without missing a beat. Everything you need to know to complete a level 2 guide should be explained at level 1, and this progression system should be strictly enforced. The reason for this is because I think the B.L.U.E system should be accessible to everyone, including people who know nothing about your subject or niche. Basically, I believe all content on the B.L.U.E system, from the lowest levels to the highest levels, should be structured almost like a tutorial, slowly leading you from knowing nothing all the way out to the limits of human ingenuity. This might sound stupid and tedious if you're someone who's already an expert, but I think doing it this way is essential if your goal is to lift the general knowledge and education level of humanity. Ultimately, I think the real innovation of the B.L.U.E system is not going to be the information itself, but the way information is structured. I think placing all information onto a hierarchy like this has lots of advantages, and I don't think any other free educational website really does this, at least not the way I'm describing. Now, what about submitting and moderating content? If you're going to allow any user to submit content, then all content should have to go through some kind of review process before publication. But who does the reviewing? If you do it the way Wikipedia does it, then malicious actors and biased reviewers will have a little bit too much control over the content. But you still need a strong system in place to prevent bad and incomplete information from getting on the site. In order to solve this, I've come up with my own system called the Verifier system. Now, before I start talking about the Verifier system, I'd like to mention that this system has flaws that I'm aware of, and I'm going to discuss. I've tried to come up with some possible solutions to these flaws, but like I said at the beginning, my ideas are just the starting point. So how would the Verifier system work? Basically, each guide that's submitted has to be reviewed and voted on by a group of people I call verifiers. Whenever a new guide or modifications to a guide are submitted by a user, an odd number of verifiers are selected at random to vote on the content, almost like a jury. They're also given a timer which can range from hours to weeks depending on the type of content. If a majority of verifiers vote in favor of publication within the time limit, the content gets published. If not, the submission goes back to the author. Also, whenever a verifier casts a vote, they should be required to explain why they voted the way they did, so that the author can make improvements or see what they did wrong. Verifiers who do not explain their votes should risk losing their verifier status. The reason is because you want to have a strong feedback loop between verifiers and content writers, so that content can always improve. User opinions should also matter, so maybe once a guide or update is published, users can then upvote it or downvote it, and if there are enough downvotes within a certain period of time, it automatically sends the content back to the author for revisions. How many downvotes and what time frame should be used, I can't say for sure. Now, in order to become a verifier, users should have to go through some sort of testing process. Because each subject and each niche is different, the actual testing process itself should depend on the niche as well as the hierarchy level. If you want to become a verifier for high-level content, especially content which has to do with complex theory and niche technical skills, it should probably require a stricter testing process. Maybe you can also make it so that high-level verifiers are able to vote on content lower than their level. Or you could be more strict about it and require verifiers to pass every test going up the hierarchy before you can become a high-level verifier. However, it should be possible to become a verifier in multiple subjects, just like you can major in multiple fields in college. There are some more important questions left regarding the verifier system, but since my answers to those questions are a bit long-winded, I'll just post my answers on screen. Pause the video if you want to read them. So how is all this going to make money? Obviously, a website like this is going to cost money to build and maintain, which means you're going to need a source of income to keep the site running. Now, I can't tell you where to get the money for building the B.L.U.E system to start. I've never dealt with VCs or angel investors or any of these types of people. My only experience with being a founder was when I tried to build NumberSwap, which, if you know that story, did not go well. But if you are able to dig up enough startup capital to build something like this, I think there's really only one good ethical way to pay for your expenses, and that's through advertising. And no, I'm not talking about traditional advertising like you see on YouTube videos or on Twitch. I think there's a better way to do it. See, the great thing about a website for activities and building stuff is that much of the stuff you can do and build will require materials, and those materials you're going to have to purchase somewhere. If you could set up a system where certain guides are matched with advertisers selling the materials and services those guides require, I think you'd have a reasonable way to generate income. For example, let's say there's a guide which teaches you how to build a Dodge Ram drivetrain. At the bottom or side of that guide's main page, you could have something like a products section or an items necessary section, which links to various places where you can buy the components necessary for that build. As long as you have a deal with each advertiser which pays you for clicks or pays a % of each sale, and as long as the Dodge company isn't actually dictating what you can put on your website, then I think you could have a decent business model. But how do you ensure that the products and services advertised on the B.L.U.E system are actually the best or most popular? One way is by having a dynamic ranking system. Basically, there could be a star rating system or a like-dislike button for each advertiser and each item sold on the B.L.U.E system. If a certain brand of tires is the most liked by users, it would appear at the very top of the products section. Generally, items with a higher rating will be ranked higher in the products section, and if a new item is introduced or when ratings change, the rankings will shift. By doing it this way, advertisers will have to compete for the top spot by actually making the best product or service, hypothetically. Of course, you want to make sure that no one can actually manipulate or game that rating system by pushing out fake reviews and review bots. In any case, I don't think that standard advertising is desirable. In my opinion, anyone who advertises a product or service on the B.L.U.E system should only be allowed to place their advertisement on guides which relate to that product or service. Also, I think ads should be confined to a certain area of guides or articles. The more you plaster advertisements on the site, the more you'll turn the B.L.U.E system from an invaluable resource into pure crap. Next, here are some quality of life additions that you could make to the B.L.U.E system once it's up and running. I'll also post these on screen instead of reading them out loud. Pause to read. Lastly, let's talk about disputes. If you actually made the B.L.U.E system the way I'm describing, disputes are going to be a common occurrence. People are going to dispute the authenticity of information. People are going to dispute hierarchies and user ranks. They're going to dispute the voting system itself. There will be so many different kinds of disputes that it'll probably be hard to keep up with at times. To make your life easier, you'll need some systematized way of resolving disputes as swiftly and as fairly as possible. Now, presumably, the voting system, the ranking system, and the separation of roles would solve most of the disputes on B.L.U.E. However, not every problem can be solved by voting or by relying on a high-level user to make decisions. For example, what happens when verifiers keep publishing a certain guide, but users hate it and keep downvoting it in order to take it down? Should users or verifiers be prioritized? Should it depend on the case? If you made it so that users can't unpublish a guide by mass downvoting it, you could solve this problem. But then you'd be opening the door for verifiers and test makers to have complete control over information, which could enshittify the website. What happens when verifiers of the same level disagree about where content should be placed on the hierarchy? Well, if you assign roles properly, this shouldn't be much of an issue. But what if no roles have been assigned yet? And what if there are an equal number of verifiers on each side who are split about where content should be placed? In order to solve this, you could make it so that an odd number of voters are required for all votes on the website. If you have an even number of verifiers, the system would automatically kick out one person in order to achieve an odd number. But how do you decide who to kick out? Here's another problem. If content can be part of multiple niches, what happens when verifiers from two different niches disagree on the information contained in a single guide, which is part of both niches? You could solve these types of disputes by having a spin-off system. Basically, when this type of disagreement takes place, the guide being disputed will be copied, and each group will get their own unique version of the guide, which they can then edit, effectively creating two different versions of the same guide. Of course, this would contradict the idea of information consolidation which I explained at the beginning of the episode, but this is one way you could deal with the problem. As for how the dispute system itself works, there are different ways you could do it. Users should, of course, be allowed to create different types of disputes, and there should be a simple system for opening disputes. But users should have to be in good standing with the website to open a dispute. If the same person is known for spamming the dispute system, then auditors should be able to flag their account and ban them from opening new disputes. Or you could make it so that users can only open a handful of disputes at a time. As for who resolves disputes, it should probably depend on what's being disputed. If the dispute has to do with hierarchy placement, then whoever's in charge of that hierarchy organization should be involved, as well as a neutral outside party such as an auditor. You could also bring in other verifiers with more experience to help in some cases. Or maybe dispute resolution should be a separate part of the site altogether in order to maintain separation of elements and in order to eliminate conflicts of interest. In any case, many types of disputes will come up, and I can't tell you exactly how to deal with each situation. You're going to need strong leaders who are good at coming up with fair solutions, as well as smart developers who can create good systems for dealing with these problems. In the end, it will be up to whoever's in charge to take these challenges on a day-to-day basis and to dedicate themselves to creating a B.L.U.E system that is useful to everyone. I would love for that person to be me, but most likely it won't be. So to anyone who has the money and the time, who finds this B.L.U.E system intriguing, I say go for it. Try to build it. Even if it fails, maybe someone in the future can take your mistakes and learn from them. What I do know for sure is that if no one even attempts to build it, then this website will never exist. Whatever, that's all I got. This is me, signing off.